So this week our A guy is Gustav Aulén. And Aulén kind of takes, do you need a sheet? Aulén takes this theory, it's called Christus Victor. And it's kind of an older theory from early on in Christianity. He kind of digs through, he wasn't the only one, but he wrote a book called Christus Victor, in which he kind of outlines these other theories of atonement we've talked about, and then said, let me present another option. And the Christus Victor theory in a nutshell is basically God is fighting kind of this cosmic battle with the powers of sin, death, and evil, and Jesus is more of a victor than a victim on the cross. So in some of the other theories we looked at, Jesus had to die to appease God's anger. And so Jesus is kind of the victim or the substitute. And this one, all the agency is on Jesus. Instead of him receiving punishment or receiving this in order to wipe the slate clean, he's kind of the, I don't want to say aggressor, but he's the primary actor taking the battle to sin, death, evil, where the cross and the resurrection provides a victory. And there are different ways of thinking about that, and different theologians have looked at it in different ways. One is this kind of idea of this kind of trickster theory, like a Trojan horse almost, that the devil doesn't know Jesus is God's son. That's why Jesus tries to keep it quiet in the Gospels and thinks Jesus is this really powerful prophet. It's like, if I can get people to kill Jesus, that's going to make things go a lot easier. So, Jesus dies and the devil thinks he's won this great victory by getting rid of this prophet. But he doesn't realize he just took the Son of God, God's self, into death, the source of life into death, and Jesus now busts out of hell, busts the gates open, frees everybody. So it's like a Trojan horse. The devil takes Jesus down, thinks he's got this big prize. Jesus is like, haha, but I'm God. Fooled you, now I'm letting everybody free. So that's one way to look at it. Another is almost like this battle that, if you ever saw Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf is fighting the Balrog and they're descending into the depths and they're fighting, and eventually Gandalf wins and he's resurrected as the White. Basically, Tolkien was a religious scholar too. He's just taking some of the language of these, really the Cappadocian fathers from the early 4th and 5th century and making that be the battle scene in Lord of the Rings. The same kind of idea there. So Christus Victor is God winning a victory on the cross and not just giving, here's how you live, or somebody has to die, or somebody has to make a payment. So, a couple kind of key things here. In a nutshell, Aulén argued that Christus Victor is a continuous divine action. So in some of these, it's like God sees things go bad, I better step in and fix it. For this, God from the beginning is kind of setting this up, trying to kind of keep the forces of evil at bay, always this kind of progress. Jesus is all part of a longer engagement, so to speak, if you want to use a military term. And God becomes the primary actor instead of things happen to God that God has to respond to. So according to Aulén, Christus Victor stands critically over against these subjective theories exemplified by Abelard, which view the atonement as affecting a change in human beings, not in God. Perhaps less persuasively, Aulén argued that Christus Victor also differs from the Latin Western understandings of the atonement as represented by Anselm, who we talked about, because they depend on a discontinuous divine work. That is, the sacrifice offered by Christ to God on behalf of humankind interrupts this larger kind of God plan, the movement from God to human beings. But in the classic Christus Victor view, God's will to reconcile is worked out in a continuous divine work that triumphs over sin, death, and the devil, at the same time passes judgment on them. Sacrifice is the means by which God acts to reconcile the world, the means through which the divine will to reconciliation realizes itself. He has some fancy words there, but basically the idea is, because Jesus is fully divine and fully human, he's the one that's reconciling, doing the work to reconcile everybody, but also he's being reconciled because on the human side, so he's kind of a double-edged sword. He's both doing the reconciling and he stands in for humanity as being reconciled. Now, let's see if there's anything else I want to say. A lot of people who like this theory like it for a few main reasons. Often because they find it an alternative to the substitution or satisfaction theories which in which God requires Jesus' violent death in order to forgive, restore, reconcile people. People don't like, well, why does God need somebody to die this violent death so he can forgive? Seems a little off. We don't like it. Also, champions of Christus Victor often define the work of the cross as a nonviolent protest against social institutional evils, whether that's militarism, racism, nationalism, ageism, whatever ism you want to throw in there, communism, whatever. It's a way of nonviolent kind of taking those things down. In the realm of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, we're going to take on these powers like Martin Luther King and racism. We're going to confront them. We're going to challenge them, but we're going to do it in a nonviolent way. Jesus confronted these powers, but didn't stage a war against them in the typical sense of armed conflict. He spoke, he lived, he died. This is how he ended up kind of overcoming death in a nonviolent way. So some people like Christus Victor for that reason. The cross is understood not as a work of the love or grace of God, but rather of the powers of evil that God overcomes. So some of these theories is almost like God demands the cross. Somebody has to die on a cross. So a lot of churches would even say, God's will from the beginning was Jesus to die on a cross. So it's God requiring the cross. In Christus Victor, it's the necessary end result of this conflict with sin, death, evil, the devil. Not that God said, how is Jesus going to die? Let's choose cross. It's, here's Jesus, what you're going to do. You're going to live and proclaim the kingdom, and that's going to have natural consequences. And might he get lynched, might he die on a cross? The cross was the way the Empire killed people. If he came back today, it could be electric chair, or if he chose, or lethal injection, or just getting mobbed or lynched. These are the things that happen. It wouldn't be that God says, Jesus, I want you lynched. It's when you live a certain way and you call out certain people and powers, certain results always end up happening. We talked about it in confirmation. One of the kids asked, do you think Jesus is going to come back? If he did, will we recognize him, all this stuff? And we eventually got to the point of, if he came back, there's a good chance what will happen is we'll kill him again. Because we might think, we know better. They thought they knew better. History always repeats itself. People are, saying like, Ukraine reminds me so much of what's happened in Nazi Germany, all this stuff. Like that was the only time that happened. History repeats itself. We're no different. We still, when people, I kind of told them, the reality is if Jesus came back, people who are really liberal will get really mad and say, Jesus is not what we wanted him to be. He's saying things that we have said he didn't say. Let's get rid of him so we can keep our idea of Jesus. And the conservatives will be like, we don't like this Jesus guy. He doesn't hate the same people we like to hate. And he's saying some things we don't agree with. Let's kill him so we can keep our idea of Jesus. The reality is we like our idea of Jesus and no one's going to be fully right. There's a whole story in the Brothers Karamazov where the Grand Inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition captures Jesus and kills him because, listen, Jesus, you're hurting the church here, buddy. We don't like what you're saying. You ruined it the first time. You had another chance. You ruined it again. It's better for the church if we got rid of you. And it's like, wow, that seems like it would never happen. But would it happen? Yes, because we almost inevitably kill anyone who speaks the truth to us. Think about the history of the world. Anybody who spoke really tough truths and affected change usually didn't fare too well in the end. There's an interesting chance if Jesus came back, similar things would happen. Because that's who we are as humans. As a side note, interesting question they had though. But, and again, the people who like Christus Victor highlight that it wasn't that God demands the cross. It's that humans demanded it. But God works through it to forgive us. God works through what we meant to hurt to turn it into salvation. And that's the beauty of God. God can take whatever we give, whatever we mess up, and still transform it into something good. To continue some World War II analogies today, think about, we capture the German Enigma code machine. The thing that they used to help and defeat us, we end up using to defeat them. The cross that was supposed to defeat Jesus ends up getting used to defeat the powers of evil and empire. That's the beauty of God. And that's one of the beauties of the Christus Victor model. Now, are there things wrong with it? Always, if you've come, you should know there's always distortions that it's going to have. It's not going to fully bring to light, or there's going to be some problems, because no theory is perfect. So, Whatever the shortcomings of Alain's work, his discussion shows that the primary question to be asked and answered was not what must human beings do to have life or be reconciled to God. Instead, the primary question is, what has God done for them? My favorite way to answer, especially when I was in high school and college, as I got smarter, I could answer better. But, in the South, people would come up and be like, have you been saved? When were you saved? And now if somebody asks, when were you saved? I say, when Jesus lived, died, and was resurrected from the dead. Because it's not about what I do. Salvation is not dependent on Pastor Stephen's actions. I am not that amazing to save myself. Salvation's the work of God. You can say, when did you recognize and receive that God saved you? Now you can ask that, and we might have a point in time. It might have been, I always kind of grew up believing, whatever it is. But we don't save ourselves. God saves us. That's important. Know that. So, let's see. All right, some potential problems that we can overemphasize the cosmic conflict here, and especially the military image of this model, leading to such problems as crusades, abortion clinic bombings, all that kind of stuff. Because Christus Victor's all this a lot of military conflict image, unfortunately has been used, to say, hey, let's go send thousands of knights to the Holy Land and try to take over Jerusalem and Israel again from the Muslims, and this is a holy war, that's what God wants, and lots of people die, and no one's happy, and horrible things are done by both sides. Or we can say, we have to fight for God here, so we're going to go bomb this clinic. Or we're going to go beat up these people who we think are beating up other people. Because we're righteous, though, we can hurt them, and it's okay. We always think we're the righteous ones doing justice, and we can then get by with other stuff. And sometimes models like this, where we have to have victory and fight, can lead to that. Doesn't mean all military image is bad, but it can be overemphasized to the point where you think the goal is to fight sometimes violently for God. It has happened in the past, it could happen again. That's one problem. Also, in the trickster version of the Christus Victor, we didn't have the sermon a few weeks ago because I switched it because of the Ukraine thing, where Jesus goes into hell because Satan just thinks he's a human, and then the humanity of Jesus in a mere disguise makes the humanity of Jesus not as important. Because it's important that Jesus becomes human to effect salvation, not just to fool the devil, but to assume humanity and heal it from the inside out. So it could downplay the humanity of Jesus a bit. That's a critique. It also makes believers, us, mere spectators of a cosmic struggle that take place way over our heads. We don't have a role to play, which could be good or bad depending on your view. Now, in some ways, we also said making it too individual is bad. We don't want to make it all individualistic. Because some of the models is all about how I'm saved, but really it's when the Bible talks about salvation, the world is being reconciled. All people. It's less about individuals and always more of a corporate sense. And too often we've made it more about the individual. But on the flip side, you can also go too far and think this is a big battle way beyond us. We have no role. We have nothing to do with it. We don't matter at all. So again, tension between those two poles. It can also seem to deny the persistence of evil and sin in history and in our own lives. It's like, evil was defeated. Everything's good now. Is everything good now? No. Evil persists. There's this great book by this Jewish scholar called Creation, the Persistence of Evil, in which it kind of analyzes all these Old Testament texts that really kind of show that chaos has always been lurking, and that one of God's primary roles in Scripture is kind of keeping chaos and evil at bay. Not just fixing everything, but just holding the waters back, so to speak. Evil persists, but just doesn't have ultimate victory. In an analogy that probably is horrible, but I'm going to say it anyway, like certain diseases now. I remember when I was a child and we heard Magic Johnson tested positive for HIV, he's going to die now. Magic Johnson's good. I mean, he now has no HIV even traceable in his body. So it still exists. Sometimes now some of these diseases, it can still exist in your body. You can't deny that. But through medicine and things, it doesn't have the long-lasting effects. Now, evil still has all kinds of effects on our world. But the ultimate victory is now God's. And that can be the hope that when all these bad things happen, they still hurt. We don't want to dismiss that. But it can also be comforting that in the end, the good side always wins. Like, I can't watch certain TV shows now. If I have to watch the end to make sure, like Survivor, like I don't want the jerks to win, so I only watch seasons when I know like one of the nice people win, and then I can watch it and all the struggle I can get through, but I don't want to have the people I don't like to win because it just ruins the show for me. That's to say, if I didn't know the end result and all these bad things were happening, it'd be harder to interact with the world. But because I know, yeah, this is bad and I don't like it, but I know ultimately good wins, I can better engage with the bad. Does that make sense? And then lastly, it deals with cosmic powers of evil, which is important. There are these larger issues of evil and death in the world. Paul always kind of personifies, evil, death, sin as these like powers you have to fight against. But it doesn't necessarily tackle our own issues of sin, evil, pride, and issues that aren't so readily apparent that we call sin, but things like not claiming self-centered agency. Like it takes on the big picture, but it always doesn't deal with the individual. So like all these models, it has some really good things that we can hold up, but if we only look at that, we're going to miss some things. Where like Abelard's moral example theory really helps us with our own lives and how we live, you hold that along with this, that it's this cosmic battle, but it's also an example of how we should live. The two of those together make a nicer picture. So that's why I have to understand like multiple to kind of get a better view. Questions, comments, snide remarks. All righty.